Hi, and welcome to Why Do Countries Exist, an episode on Brazilian political parties. So today's episode was requested by someone, I think. I'm not 100% sure, but I could have sworn someone requested me to do this, I swear. If you want me to do another country's political parties, please either comment it down below, send me an email, or put a request in the request form in the description. I currently have requests to do Israeli parties, Irish parties, Polish parties, Japanese parties, Turkish parties, Danish parties, Greek parties, Moroccan parties, Chilean parties, German parties, and many more. I would also like to give a big shout out to João Faustino. He helped me out with writing this episode, which I am very grateful for. He actually is a contributor to the European Times, writing mostly about Brazilian and Portuguese politics, and this is actually a collaboration with him. He is going to be writing an article on Brazilian political parties, which will serve as a companion to this. I will encourage all of you to go check it out after the episode. I will put a link in the description. Brazil is having an election on October 2nd. Brazil will elect a whole bunch of people to political offices, but the biggest election is that for the presidency. The president is elected via a two-round system. If any presidential candidate gets over 50% of the vote, they are elected. And if no candidate gets over 50% of the vote, then the top two candidates go on to a second round of voting, where whoever gets the most votes wins. While there are roughly 12 candidates all hoping to become the next president of Brazil, the two heavyweights in the race are current incumbent, Jair Bolsonaro, and the former president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Opinion polls are suggesting that a second round will take place and Lula will likely win, although Bolsonaro seems to be slowly rising in the polls, and maybe an upset could be pulled off. Before we talk about other elections that will take place on the 2nd, it's important to note that loyalty to Brazilian political parties tends to be relatively low. What do I mean by this? Well, if someone gets elected as a member of the Labour Party in Australia, that person is likely for their entire political career to stick with the Labour Party. It isn't entirely unheard of for someone to switch party affiliation, but it's uncommon. However, in Brazil, this is not the case. Politicians will pretty regularly switch parties. For example, President Bolsonaro, in the 33 years he's been active in politics, has switched party affiliation 11 times. Politicians are able to do this because voters in Brazil tend to vote far more based on personality than political affiliation. Voters may support individuals within parties, but not really entire parties as a whole. So back to the elections. Besides electing the president, Brazilians are going to elect all 513 members of the Chamber of Deputies. These 513 deputies are elected from the 26 states of Brazil and the federal district where the capital is located. These deputies are elected via proportional representation, and the chamber is broadly supposed to represent the people of Brazil. Each state will send a certain number of deputies based on the population of the state, with it ranging from 8 deputies, the number 10 states send to the chamber, to 70 deputies, the number of deputies sent from Sao Paulo. The Chamber of Deputies will vote on rules and regulations. Brazil will also elect 1/3 of the Senate. The Senate in total has 81 senators, so 27 senators are up for election this year. The Senate is in theory supposed to represent the states. The senators are elected via a simple first-past-the-post method in each state, along with the federal district. So whichever candidate gets the most votes will become that state's senator. The Senate, like the Chamber, votes on rules and regulations. The main difference between the two bodies seems to largely just be that the Senate is considered more prestigious, since it is a smaller political body, and senators are elected to 8-year terms while deputies are elected to 4-year terms. Brazil also is a federation, so states will elect their own state governments on the 2nd. Each state has their own governor, vice-governor, and state legislator that will govern and write laws for the respective states. For the purposes of this episode, I will pay attention to the number of governors and vice-governors each party has. Finally, before we go into individual parties, it's important we talk about a collection of parties known as the centrão, or big center. Now normally, I will try to go into most, if not all parties present in a country, and talk about them. However, many parties in Brazil fall into this category of parties known as the centrão, which broadly consists of parties that don't really have a strong ideology, or, quite frankly, a very interesting history. I mean, the name implies a centrist ideology, and I would say parties in this category tend to be very broadly center-right. I say broadly center-right just because these parties are largely made up of traditional political elites who don't want to rock the boat or change the system at all, tend to support, again broadly, free market or mixed economics, want to work with almost any government that gets in power just to ensure that they can get some power, and they also are largely corrupt. That being said, there are several parties that present themselves as more left-wing that are also sometimes included in the centrão, like the Brazilian Socialist Party or Solidarity. The centrão is a very informal classification, so the number of politicians and parties that belong to this category do vary depending on who you ask, but generally parties like Republicanos, Progressistas, and the Social Democracy Party would all be grouped into the classification of centrão. And one article in 2020 estimated that somewhere from 170 to 220 deputies belong to this group. I've painted a pretty negative picture of the group, but there is an argument for the group. Some have argued that the group helps moderate the Brazilian government and prevent a radical from coming in and taking over and completely destroying the country by instituting a bunch of crackpot ideas. One political scientist argued that the centrão helps reduce political polarization since they force politicians to come together and make compromises. There also is a great quote that is sometimes used by supporters of centrão-like politicians. Quote, "They steal, but they get things done." Besides sounding like it was plucked straight out of Plunkett of Tammany Hall, it shows that there's a segment of Brazil who, so long as the trains arrive on time, don't really care too much if politicians steal from them. The obvious counterpoint to this is that a politician does not have to steal millions of dollars in order for the trains to arrive on time. Many people also just feel like that politicians defending the centrão are really just trying to defend the rampant corruption that takes place in Brazil and prevent much needed reforms from taking place in favor of the status quo, which favors the rich and corrupt. So me and João aren't going to talk about every party in Brazil, just because a lot are sort of the same. However, we will talk about a couple parties that you could make the case for belonging in the centrão. Largely, we are going to be talking about these parties since they at least have something interesting to say about them. The first party we will talk about is one of these parties that is sometimes included in the centrão. Partido Liberal, or the Liberal Party, or PL, has largely risen to prominence this election because in 2021, Bolsonaro decided to join the party. Initially, it was formed as a merger between a moderate centrão party and a right-wing nationalist/protectionist party. The party has now moved to a firmly right-wing direction, and is broadly now made up of conservatives, right-wing nationalists, and Bolsonaro supporters. The party's numbers have swelled, and it right now is the largest party in the Chamber of Deputies, and will likely be one of the largest parties post-election. PL in 2018 got most support broadly in the northern parts of the country, particularly in Amapá, Maranhão, and the Federal District. Bolsonaro, on the other hand, was elected in 2018 by a coalition of social conservatives, those who wanted to see radical political change away from the centrão and left, evangelical Christians, white men, those who made more, and people from the south and center-west of the country. PL currently has 78 deputies, 9 senators, and the governor of Rio de Janeiro and the vice-governor of Santa Catarina are both members of the party. The party is obviously backing Bolsonaro for the presidency, and is led by Valdemar Costa Neto, a former deputy. PL's version of Brazil is pretty much Bolsonaro's version of Brazil. Bolsonaro throughout his career has stood as a politician promoting social conservative and hard-right ideas, and has been called the Trump of the tropics. He supports tough on crime laws, wanting to give greater power to the police, favors stand-your-ground laws, wants to crack down on corruption, and has praised the fifth Brazilian government, a military dictatorship because it brought order to the country. His social conservatism also manifests in his opposition to gay marriage, abortion, further environmental regulations, and affirmative action. Is supportive of closer relations with Israel and governments led by right-wing populists, while opposing left-wing governments in Latin America, and has called for a return to paper ballots. He also is in favor of broadly free market economics supporting privatization and free trade, although he has also supported more recently more welfare benefits, and has supported some interventionist economic policy. Bolsonaro does have support from large segments of Brazilian society, but in polls it's pretty clear he isn't as popular as he was in 2018. There's several reasons for this. Firstly, Bolsonaro has said a lot of controversial things throughout his political career. Most relevant to this election is suggesting to his supporters that if he loses, he may not accept the results, and some even fear he may attempt a coup if he loses. Bolsonaro also was elected in 2018 as someone who would clean up corruption in Brazil. But corruption is still very much present in the country. Brazil coming into 2022 is struggling with large divisions politically, racially, and economically, and is struggling with COVID, which has killed over 670,000 people and hurt Brazil's economy. All of which opponents of Bolsonaro have blamed him for, at least partially. Bolsonaro supporters have argued that Bolsonaro's agenda has been hampered by his rivals in Congress, but it will still be a tough, if not impossible, battle for Bolsonaro to get elected in 2022. A big question is also what will happen to PL after the election. Even if Bolsonaro wins, it wouldn't be shocking if he left the party afterwards, seeing as he did the same thing with his previous party after he was elected in 2018, which will likely see the party's numbers drop and suffer. Bolsonaro's main opponent Lula is from the Partido dos Trabalhadores, or Workers' Party, or PT. PT is the main party of the center-left in Brazil, and is unique in having a pretty loyal support base, a strong organizational structure, and doesn't suffer from defections as much. It initially was a socialist party, but after Lula was first elected in 2002, it moderated and now occupies a broadly center-left platform. Its support base is seen as a combination of organized labor, social activists, some progressive sections of the Catholic Church, and a decent chunk of the middle class. It historically had a pretty loyal support base in the south and Sao Paulo, but today is mostly found in the northeast and north. It currently has 55 deputies, 7 senators, and the governors of Piauí, Bahia, and Rio Grande do Norte, and the vice-governor of Sergipe are all members of the party. The party is officially led by its national president, Galicia Hoffmann, a former senator and current deputy. However, the party is unofficially led by Lula, who is the party's candidate for the presidential election. Lula is running this election largely calling back to when he was in charge from 2002 to 2010. He argues that his time in office saw great economic growth and a strong social safety net. He also has argued for progressive social policy, such as greater environmental regulations and indigenous rights, while supporting gun control and wanting to crack down on violence against black and brown people in the country. He wants to tax the rich, wants to reduce the wealth gap in Brazil, wants to end food insecurity in the country, and wants to invest more in infrastructure and housing. Lula also tends to broadly support left-wing governments and movements throughout Latin America. Finally, it's important to note that Lula, while he is the candidate of the left in the election, also is running with the Brazilian Socialist Party, a centrão party, and wants to present himself as someone who will reform the Brazilian political system, but will still work with it. Lula is extremely popular among his base of supporters in Brazil, but that is not to say Lula and PT are free from controversy. Once Lula was elected in 2002, he started receiving backlash. Some were upset that Lula had chosen to work with parties in the Centrão, and many of the more principled left-wingers in the party started to abandon PT. Others accused PT of fiscal irresponsibility, and of being apologists for authoritarian regimes like Russia or Venezuela. However, the big critique that followed Lula and PT was that the party was corrupt. Pretty early into Lula's first term, accusations came out that PT was paying politicians to vote with the government on certain bills. In 2014, Operation Car Wash began, which led to Lula being arrested for corruption in 2018. His successor, Dilma Rousseff, was impeached in 2016, and the party's reputation was severely damaged. PT supporters will argue that Operation Car Wash was politically motivated, and many of the people who accuse PT of corruption are themselves corrupt. And this is to a certain extent true, but it's not a great look for PT for their argument to essentially be, yeah, we may be corrupt, but we're not that corrupt, considering its origins as a party fighting for a new, just society. Next we go to União Brasil, or Brazil Union. The union was formed recently in 2021 as a merger of the Social Liberal Party and the Dems. The Social Liberal Party was initially, a shock of all shocks, a social liberal party, until Bolsonaro joined the party in 2018, when it became the party for his supporters. After Bolsonaro left the party in 2019, it slowly started to lose members while still trying to appeal to right-wing populists. Dems was founded as a sort of successor to Arena, a party that ruled the country under the Fifth Republic and was very pro-military. Both parties have started losing influence due to defections and decided to join together to consolidate their power. The Union today is right-wing, embracing conservative ideas. The Social Liberals in the 2018 election won most votes in the South and Southeast, largely owing to Bolsonaro's support of the party. The Dems in the 2018 election, meanwhile, won most support broadly in the north and center of the country, particularly in Tocantins. It currently has 55 deputies, 6 senators, and 4 governors and 4 vice-governors are members of the party. The party is currently headed by Luciano Bivar, a deputy. The party's presidential candidate is Soraya Thronique, a senator. The Union on its website talks a lot about its devotion to Brazil's democracy and asks for people to have faith in the country's political institutions. It argues for privatization, tax cuts, and austerity measures. It also argues for preserving the traditional Brazilian family, wants to do more to fight climate change, and wants to increase the representation of women and racial minorities in politics. Thornicki is generally considered a conservative, arguing for liberal economics, wants to defend private property rights, is pro-gun rights, and wants to crack down on corruption. This election is the first election the Union has ever faced, so a big question is how well will they do? The Union is trying to present itself as a mainline conservative party, which may attract center-right voters. However, Bolsonaro supporters will likely rally to PL and support him, while those on the left will likely ignore the party entirely. The party also, unsurprisingly, has several members accused of corruption. Overall, it seems the Union is unlikely to continue to be in the dominant position it is right now, but it's unlikely it will entirely disappear. We now go to one of the most important parties in Brazil, Movimento Democrático Brasileiro, or the Brazilian Democratic Movement, or MDB. MDB was formed in 1965 during the military dictatorship, and served as the only legal opposition party. It was originally a collection of various anti-government forces, ranging from socialists to conservatives, that all opposed the regime. However, after the fall of the dictatorship in 1985, many left the party to form their own political outfits. Despite this, the party is still quite powerful in Brazilian politics, often serving as kingmakers. It today has a sort of broad, centrish-ish ideology, and is often considered a part of the centrão. It, based on its 2018 results, got most support in either the south or parts of the northwest. It currently has 37 deputies, 12 senators, making it the largest party in the Senate, and the governors of Para in the federal district, the vice-governor of Roraima, and both the governor and vice-governor of Alagoas are all members of the party. It is currently led by Baleia Rossi, a deputy. The party's presidential candidate is Simon Tebet, the former vice-governor and current senator from Mato Grosso do Sul. The MDB's party program argues for democracy, opposes authoritarianism, opposes discrimination based on race, sex, or ideology, opposes the death penalty, wants to crack down on corruption, supports federalism, and supports compulsory voting. However, they also note that diversity of thought is protected in their party, so it's hard to say exactly how firm they are on these stances. The party historically, when in power, has supported liberal economic policies, supporting less regulation and privatization, and tends to favor closer relations with the US. Tebet in her campaign has supported economic liberalization, privatization, supports gun control, and is centrist on abortion, opposing the practice but not wanting to criminalize it in cases of sexual assault, and believing it shouldn't be a political taboo. MDB's position as a party of the centro means it's often seen as a party that upholds a lot of the corrupt status quo in Brazil. Many politicians in the party have been accused of corruption, including Tebet. Tebet herself doesn't seem to be an important contender in the race. She's polling around 3%, well below both Bolsonaro, Lula, and some other candidates. MDB has either worked closely with or been a part of the ruling administration for most of the governments in the current Sixth Republic. While this does mean it is politically powerful, it also means people don't really feel they stand for anything and simply serve to keep power for themselves. The next party was one of the many breakoffs from the MDB, the Partido de Social Democracia Brasileira, or Brazilian Social Democracy Party, or PSDB, broke off from the MDB in the late 80s, and served from 1994 to 2018 as a leading center-right force in the country. While the name suggests a more left-wing party, and the party has argued it is centrist, it seems most to find them as largely being made up of center-right liberals. It dominated Brazil in the 90s, and throughout Lula's reign, it served as the main opposition to him. It today serves as a part of the anti-Bolsonaro opposition, and works closely with the Citizens Party, a social liberal party. Also, fun fact, PSDB's mascot is a toucan, so its supporters are adorably referred to sometimes as tucanos. The party historically did very well in the south and southeast, particularly in Sao Paulo. It, in the 2018 election, got most support in Mato Grosso do Sul. It currently has 20 deputies, 6 senators, and the governors of Mato Grosso do Sul, Sao Paulo, and Rio Grande do Sul, and the vice-governors of Amazonas and Minas Gerais are all members of the party. The party is currently headed by Bruno Araújo, a former deputy and minister of cities. It is backing MDB's Tebet for the presidency. PSDB tended to argue at its height for broadly liberal economics. It backed privatization, supported a limited welfare state, wanted to modernize the state, and sought to combat inflation in the country. It also was, like many center-right politicians in Brazil, fairly sympathetic towards the US. It both then and today overall was pretty moderate and is sometimes considered a part of the centro. PSDB in both the 2010 and 2014 election got over 30% of the vote in the first round in the presidential election. However, in the 2018 election, the party won less than 5% of the vote in the first round. This, along with losses in both the chamber and Senate, shows that PSDB is a party that is struggling to remain as an important player in Brazilian politics. It has lost out to more hardline politicians, and much of the party's support base has abandoned them. It seems unlikely the party will rise again to its former status as the main center-right party in the country, and is moving more and more into just becoming another party in the centrão. It also is accused of corruption, of being made up of American boos who love everything American simply because it's American, and of mostly being a party for the rich and powerful and caring little for poor Brazilians. We go next to Partido Democrático Trabalhista, or Democratic Labour Party, or PDT. PDT is a center-left social democratic party. It emerged at the end of the military dictatorship and sought to emulate the radical populism of former Brazilian president Getúlio Vargas. It served as one of the leading left-wing forces after the dictatorship for a time, until PT overtook it in the 90s. PDT and PT generally occupy a center-left position, with the main difference largely coming down to the personalities in the two parties not really liking each other. It got most support in 2018 in the Northeast, especially in the state of Ceará. It currently has 18 deputies, 4 senators, and the governors of Amapá and Ceará, and the vice-governor of Paraíba, are all members of the party. The party is currently led by Carlos Lupi, the former Minister for Labor, and is currently the Vice President of the Socialist International. The party's presidential candidate is Ciro Gomes, a politician who served in several roles, most famously as the governor of Ceará and Minister of Finance, and most recently as a former deputy. PDT argues on its ideology page for ensuring children are able to grow up in livable conditions, workers, women, and black and indigenous people are properly respected, and Brazil's environment is protected. It also advocates for reducing unemployment in Sao Paulo and creating more jobs, wants to do more to reduce the effects of inflation on truckers, and supports a broadly mixed economy. Ciro in his campaign has tried to present himself as someone opposed to the more populist/demagoguery rhetoric of Lula and Bolsonaro, and is a technocrat. He has argued for an FDR-style New Deal, supports progressive taxes and cracking down on tax evasion, believes private businesses and investments are vital to economic growth, wants to reindustrialize Brazil, wants to reduce gas prices, and supports a universal minimum income program. PDT is often seen as playing second fiddle to the much larger PT. PDT, while it has tried to present itself as a center-left alternative to PT, almost always gets less votes than them. This can partially be explained by the origins of the two parties. PT was founded by labor unions, progressive activists, and Catholics to represent the working class, and ultimately appeared, at the very least initially, as a party made up by and for working class folks. Meanwhile, PDT was founded by political elites to represent the working class, which just didn't have the same appeal. There's certainly a market for PDT's ideas, but PT will likely continue to serve as the main party of the center-left. This means there is very likely some resentment towards PDT for splitting the center-left vote and not consolidating around the dominant PT. Ciro in polls is in a distant third and will likely get a similar result as last election. We go to another party of the Brazilian left with the Partido Comunista do Brasil, or the Communist Party of Brazil, or PCdoB. PCdoB is a communist party. It was originally founded in 1962 as a radical Maoist breakoff of the Brazilian Communist Party. It, under the dictatorship, attempted to stage a revolution in the north of the country, but ultimately failed. After the dictatorship, it quickly became close with PT, and has since 1989 served as a loyal ally to Lula and the PT. It is a part of the Brazil of Hope Federation along with PT and the Green Party. It got most support broadly in northern parts of Brazil, especially in the state of Maranhão. It currently has 8 deputies, and the vice-governors of Rio Grande do Norte and Pernambuco are members of the party. It is headed by Luciano Santos, a former deputy and current vice-governor of Pernambuco. It has endorsed Lula for the presidential election. The party officially defines itself as Marxist-Leninist, and talks about wanting to transition Brazil from capitalism to socialism. However, it, since aligning with PT, has de facto moved to a more moderate position, serving more as a pressure group encouraging PT to move left. It seeks to oppose neoliberal policies, opposes American imperialism and interventionism, supports more direct democracy, wants to be able to elect judges, supports more renewable energy, wants more respect for women in Brazilian society and in the workforce, wants more environmental regulations, and opposes monopolies in the communication sector. Next we go to Partido Novo, or the New Party. Novo is a classically liberal party and libertarian party, embracing a limited government. It was founded recently in 2015, arguing it was a party outside traditional politics and would streamline the political process in the country. It made some gains in the 2018 election, being endorsed and backed largely by right-wing intellectuals and the right-wing intelligentsia. It got most support in 2018 from the southern parts of the country, particularly in Rio Grande do Sul, and actually didn't run candidates in several northern states. It currently has 8 deputies, and the governor of Minas Gerais is a member of the party. It is headed by Eduardo Ribeiro, a businessman. The party's presidential candidate is Luis Felipe de Alvia, a political scientist who is polling at less than 1% in opinion polls. The party argues for less government involvement in the economy. It wants to lower taxes, it wants to reduce government bureaucracy, supports privatizing parts of the Brazilian healthcare system, supporting privatization overall, and wants to end subsidies on non-renewable energy. De Alvia's campaign also seems to base a lot of its themes on these issues, along with also opposing increased political polarization. Novo also supports more power to state governments, opposes compulsory voting, wants to crack down on corruption, opposes political parties receiving public funds, supports digitizing government services, supports same-sex civil unions, and opposes gun control. We switch back to the Brazilian left with Partido Socialismo e Liberdade, or Party of Socialism and Liberty, or PSOL. PSOL was formed as a left-wing breakoff from PT, criticizing the party for moderating and allying with right-wing parties. The party, while it sits left of PT, is willing to defend Lula from accusations of corruption, and today works closely with the Sustainability Network. The party is seen as holding a variety of left-wing and socialist factions, but is broadly defined as democratic socialist. Its support base is largely made up of intellectuals and college students. In the 2018 election, it did best in Rio de Janeiro and Para. It currently has 8 deputies. It is led by Juliano Medeiros, a historian and political scientist. It is currently backing Lula in the presidential election. PSOL is not a heterogeneous party, with several different factions in the party, ranging from Trotskyists to dissident social democrats. So the party overall doesn't necessarily have a clear and consistent message. However, the party broadly overall acts to the left of PT, opposing neoliberal reforms, opposes working in, quote, ordinary government with the ruling class, is hostile towards US imperialism, particularly as it pertains to Latin America and the Middle East, is pro-Palestinian, and calls for better workers' rights and reform. It wants to remove corruption, supports agrarian reforms, supports anti-globalization movements throughout the world while still embracing internationalism, wants to reduce working hours to just 40 a week, supports urban reform to provide better houses, and wants to increase funding for healthcare, infrastructure, and education. Next we go to Partido Verde, or the Green Party, or PV. PV is a Green Party, embracing environmentalist thought. It was largely irrelevant until the 2010 election, when its presidential candidate won almost 20% of the vote. However, the party failed to really capitalize on the success, and while it still is a player in Brazilian politics, it doesn't really hold a lot of influence in the country. It is currently a part of the Brazil of Hope Federation, along with PT and PCdoB. It really broadly got most support in eastern states, although there wasn't really any strongholds for the party. It got most support in Ceará, Santa Catarina, and the Federal District. It currently has 4 deputies. It is headed by José Luis Pena, a former deputy and former Secretary of Culture for São Paulo. It has endorsed Lula for the presidential election. PV, being a Green Party, puts environmental issues as some of its top priorities. It supports organic agriculture, wants to promote recycling, wants to reduce the use of pesticides, wants more government oversight over large mining and pig companies, wants to protect watersheds in the country and provide more clean water, and wants to invest more in energy-saving technologies. It also supports broadly progressive ideas, such as ensuring indigenous Brazilians are given access to more land in the country, supports gay marriage, wants to introduce a negative tax, is pro-choice, wants more oversight over the police, and supports Brazil being given a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. After that, we have the Partido Trabalhista Brasileiro, or the Brazilian Labour Party, or PTB. PTB was founded in the late 70s, and claims to be the successor to the original Brazilian Labour Party that existed from 1945 to 1965. The original PTB was the party for Vargas and his supporters, mostly a combination of the working class, middle class, and the military. PTB supported his version of Brazilian nationalism, which embraced a mixed economy, a strong welfare state, and Vargas's populist rhetoric. The current PTB was founded at the end of the military dictatorship, and tried to appeal to Vargas's supporters, and was even headed for a time by a niece of Vargas's. However, PTB failed to capture Vargas's support base and largely served as a minor party in Brazil. It has worked with both PSDB and PT, holding no real ideology. In this election, it has moved right and begun embracing right-wing populist positions, and serves currently as an ally to Bolsonaro. It got most support in 2018 broadly in the north, and did the best in Sergipe, Mato Grosso, and Rio Grande do Sul. It has 3 deputies and 2 senators. It is currently led by Roberto Jefferson, a former deputy and also the party's presidential candidate. Jefferson's campaign is quite odd, because not only is Jefferson under house arrest for corruption charges, but he also said his candidacy is not against Bolsonaro, but rather hopes to attract right-wingers who don't want to vote at all, so that a left-wing candidate doesn't win in the first round. Finally, we will go to Reja Sustentabilidade, or Sustainability Network, or Reja. Reja is largely based around party leader Marina Silva, the Green Party candidate that got almost 20% of the vote in 2010. After that election, she left PV and founded Reja, and campaigned for president with the Brazilian Socialist Party in 2014 and got 21% of the vote. She tried again in 2018, but this time didn't do as well, getting only 1% of the vote. Reja and Silva are considered to be sort of like a more moderate Green Party, favoring stricter environmental regulations, opposing corruption, supporting more socially liberal policies, and opposing radical changes to the economy. It recently formed an alliance with PSOL. Reja in 2018 got most support in Amapá and Roraima. It has 2 deputies and 1 senator. Silva, before joining the party, also was the Minister of the Environment and was a senator. Reja is backing Lula for the election. So those are a decent chunk of the parties in Brazil. Again, I have to give a big shout out to João and will encourage you to check out his reporting at the European Times. Link will be in the description. I would really appreciate it if you could check it out, look at some of his articles, and yeah. And in terms of what will happen on the 2nd, it's likely that Lula will emerge victorious after a second round of voting, just due to his popularity among the Brazilian electorate. In terms of the party's position in the legislature, it's really hard to judge. Again, it's important to remember that Brazilian politics are driven less by the parties themselves and more by individual politicians. So figuring out which party is going to emerge as the largest after this election really is just incredibly difficult to figure out. We can broadly assume that PT and PL will probably emerge as the largest parties, but how much they will win and where all the other parties will be is a very big question. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for listening. I hope my pronunciation of Portuguese was at least somewhat passable. I definitely could tell at a couple points that I was definitely mispronouncing things wrong, but hopefully it's at least partially passable, or at least you can all understand what I'm saying. Admittedly, part of it might just be I'm busy with moving, and also I am in a 90-degree car, so I'm kind of suffering with that. But let's be real, if you've seen any of my other stuff, you know my pronunciations aren't the best. Yeah, next time I will talk about the history of Cameroon. Not sure when that is going to get out, but I've actually, in college, I worked on a project talking about Cameroon, so hopefully that should speed things up a little bit. And then after that, I will talk about Israeli elections coming up in early November. I should have someone helping me on that. And then after that, I will talk about Irish political parties. So yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. If you want, you can email me at whydocountriesexist@gmail.com for your thoughts, comments, suggestions, or hate mail. Take care. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.